Yeah, every time I see some ravens or crows, that shit
These things are so smart.
looks like some fucking dinosaurs running around. I mean, I saw a pileated woodpecker, and that shit is like, it was right outside the window, and
Can you imagine a world where that thing is like 3 feet from like tip of its physical like butt to the tip of its head, not including the
or
beak,
like 6 feet,
or 6 feet, and
or
has
like 9 feet.
and has, I'm just talking about a small one though. Just imagine a small one.
But what was it?
But yeah, like a 12 or 15 foot long fucking body with wings and feathers, like we're in like a 20-30 foot wingspan, and and like a 7 foot beak.
Yeah, I saw a golden eagle one time in the wild, and it was gigantic, and those things are not big compared to the dinosaurs at all.
I saw the biggest hawk in that I've ever seen in Monroe County. I saw it near the Cedar Bluffs, and as I drove by in just a normal car, a sedan, its head was above the door line where the window emerges. It was standing there. Its head was like right around the position of the side view mirror.
Jeez.
As I drove by it, it was huge. And normal birds fly away, and this thing just it sat there on the side of the road, standing over whatever it was eating, and looked at me. And it's like, what the?
That's when you know birds are like dinosaurs, when they don't give a fuck about you in your car.
In a car.
Yeah, that's a big thing.
Holy crap. That's the biggest bird I've ever seen up close, and it wasn't phased by a car. And I mean, that's only like a meter tall. Like 3 meters or 4 meters of giant bird with. Yeah. I mean, when that beak scales, that's like a 3 foot beak.
Well, when I was in Uganda, they have I forget if they're storks, but they'll stand on the ceilings of like a house or something and just stare at you. It's fucking creepy as shit because they're 4 or 5 feet tall.
Yeah, they have like sabers for beaks.
Yeah. It's like
that fucking thing.
The first time I saw them, I was like, "What the fuck?" And people are just used to them there. But it was at night, so it was just this weird. The first time to see that shit is.
Close your doors at night. You might see a stork land on your balcony.
Yeah.
Don't do anything about it. It'll leave eventually.
I think that's what it was. I think they were storks, but I'd have to double check. But
when I worked for a software development company, there was a creek out back of the second office, and occasionally I would see little baby blue heron.
Mm-hmm.
No more than a foot long, maybe a 2 or 3 foot wingspan, fishing and killing snakes. And those things have a dagger for a beak.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I'm interested in herons and birds like that, because to me that's like that's the fencing bird. Because of the nature of its long beak. And then I see a video of one eating a chipmunk, I think, where it's like standing there over this hole waiting, and the next thing you know is like rams its head in the hole and pulls out a chipmunk and proceeds to swallow it.
Wow. Nature's a bitch, man.
Oh my god. Like, stuff like that is incredible. It's a freaking bird, and it rammed its head in a hole and pulled out an animal.
Well, I had to run a hawk. It was a red-tailed hawk off, he flew down, was standing on the ground, waiting outside of a gutter for a chipmunk that was in the gutter. He I don't know how he knew the chipmunk was in the gutter, where he saw him from, but he was standing on the ground just looking at the gutter, and I had to run up on him to chase him off, where I was yelling at him and he wasn't moving.
Yeah.
And then eventually, like I said, I had to run up on him, just because I don't want hawks to feel that comfortable around me.
Yeah. Man, that's just like animals are getting a lot more bold.
Mm-hmm.
My parents live in town, and there have always been deer. In fact, the neighborhood is called Deer Park because they're like these family of deer that just migrate to this area, and then they migrate out, but they always come back to this area every year. And during the spring and fall, you could find these deer hanging out. I mean, pretty much all year now. They've kind of moved in permanently, but you'll find like 2 or 3 of them in someone's yard just hanging out, and you can drive right up to them.
Yeah.
You can practically walk up to them.
Yeah. I lived over there for a while, and like they are really comfortable.
Oh yeah. Very bold. They like they'll walk into people's gardens. You can't really have a garden around deer like that.
No, the couple times I looked out the back window and they were just sitting in the backyard.
Just laying there.
Just laying there.
It's like, yeah, this place is nice. Yeah. These guys are cool. The chipmunks are pretty chill. That means this place is cool.
This was at a different residence, but one time I woke up, I had fallen asleep on the floor, and I woke up and the deer was looking at me, like, out the back window, and that's where you're just like, they do not give a fuck.
Yeah, of course not. Deer take out cars.
Yeah.
Deer are incredibly, like, this is their environment. They're completely adapted to all this stuff. I mean, probably not roads and cars, really, because that's kind of a new thing. But I feel like they're way more, adapted to this environment than we are.
Most definitely.
And I was reading, we talk about how it doesn't take long to lose the civilization and technology. I think like that's one of our reoccurring themes. But I was reading a thread on Facebook, and I remember seeing someone talking about a documentary where they explore that the vast majority of civilization's failures all occurred over a period of like 75 years, and after a 75-year period, they were pretty much done. And so
that's all it takes.
Yeah.
That's basically 3 generations in a row.
Yeah. And so that kind of falls into the generational rule of the generation that creates will be followed by a generation that maintains, will be followed by a generation that doesn't understand the generation that created everything.
Right. I think that is a problem, and one of the big issues is that generations, I think once a generation gets set in their ways, whatever ways those are, they don't want them to change, and they want the next generation to do those. And what ends up happening is, I think the first generation wants to do those traditions out of respect, and then the next generation doesn't want to do those traditions because they're disconnected. And then there's all these like cultural reasons why people rebel against tradition and pre-existing institutions, which makes it impossible for things to get passed down through multiple generations, regardless of whatever those things are. There's just a human tendency to shun things that are forced upon a person or forced upon a group, and knowing that those things can even be like a tradition like marriage or Valentine's Day or some seemingly innocuous, that then, because it feels forced, an entire generation may shun that, this is kind of where I'm starting to see a lot of liberal and left-wing ideas as having been the generation just shunning the previous generation's ideas and not being internally consistent on their own. Because one thing that is really starting to bother me, and this is, we're about to get real controversial.
Okay.
About to get super controversial. And before I say this, I'm not supporting or condoning anything. I'm merely pointing out an inconsistency. Now, the inconsistency is for a child. It's not okay for that kid to pray the gay away. If that kid feels gay but is in a household that, whether it's because the parent decides, because of their Christianity, or whatever reason they don't want their kid to be gay at that point in time, to seek therapy, that's not okay. That's completely unacceptable. You take that same child, and that same child does not feel like they're born in the right sex, and the parent says, oh, you're actually transgender, you need to get reassignment surgery, and you take someone who has not even developed their full brain, it's completely okay for them to go get that surgery.
Oh, to transition?
Transition at underage. We're talking about a minor. It's completely fine. A person who hasn't even hit puberty yet.
Yeah.
And this is kind of where it's like, those two things are ideas held on the same side of the political aisle. Like, if I was talking about, if one of those things were right wing and one of those things were left wing, they wouldn't be inconsistent. But both of those ideas are held on the same political aisle. So that's kind of where I'm like, I have to ask, how can one person who's supposed to have the same political ideology hold those ideas and be internally consistent, because those ideas are not consistent.
So when I was back in the 90s, in the end of the 90s, when I graduated high school, the popular belief was that the brain continued developing into the middle 20s. Mm-hmm. And then now I believe they said that it still keeps going.
Yep.
Actually, pretty much indefinitely, as long as you continue to engage in physical activity and you engage in you maintain your mental education, you maintain some kind of malleability with your cognitive processes and your ability to forge new neural pathways. And so no, the brain never stops developing, it just keeps going as long as you do things right, treat it right. And so this idea that, I don't know, I don't think that anyone's really ever, we reach a state of maturity at some point, and it's different for every person. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's really dangerous to experiment on children or to leverage children as a means for political or any kind of political or legislative end. It's really dangerous when society starts allowing that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because nobody wants to hurt children. We all want them to have the best opportunity to succeed and to unlock their potential, to realize their potential. And so, we don't want to stop them, but I don't know, that seems like a very dangerous.
It's a very slippery slope.
Yeah.
It's a very slippery slope. And that's kind of where,
well, isn't that the question with genetic test or genetic engineering and eugenics and all that kind of stuff?
Absolutely.
I feel like
absolutely, man.
There is a positive to
how close is that to eugenics? I mean, it's the same.
Yeah. We're really close to being able to.
We need to ask that question: is giving a child transgender surgery eugenics?
Reassignment? Does reassignment qualify as eugenics?
That's the question.
Is it in the same
in the same vein as someone who wants to dictate the outcome of their?
So in that case, does that include body modification, like glute implants or breast implants?
I think that's a great question.
Or plastic surgery, like facial reconstruction, even.
Does eugenics have to happen pre-birth? At this point in science history,
does eugenics
Well, should we limit eugenics
to just genetic manipulation?
To just genetics? Because then, what about that woman in Germany who dyed her skin?
Is it about the
black?
Is it about the genetics, or is it about the outcome?
About the expression of the genes.
So is body modification?
Because isn't that the whole point of eugenics? Is to modify the expression of the gene in the first place.
Yeah.
So if we're able to modify what is the appearance of the expression, is that not postnatal eugenics? And that in this form, and I think that's if that's the case, shouldn't we be not allowing adults to make these decisions for children?
So like the lizard man. I believe he killed himself, but
oh wow.
But I may be wrong. I probably should look that up. But I remember like reading about the lizard man who like forked his tongue and had implants placed all over his forehead, so he would have like, these bone-looking things coming out, and I feel like that guy and the cat guy went to extraordinary lengths to modify their bodies. So that they would have the outcome that they wanted.
Eugenics? How do we not classify that as the obviously they don't change their genes, but again, the whole point of eugenics was to change what the expression of the modified genes was in the real world anyway. So it was always the expression that mattered, and it was just the genes were a mean to the end. So if we can get to the end, that's again. And that's why I think we really need to have this conversation before the science gets any.
So maybe those things, they're not entirely identical. They exist on different parts of the spider graph, and they're actually really close to each other on the spider graph.
Exactly.
And so
exactly. So, and this is why we'll say that Nazi eugenics are bad, but this is okay. Because
it's really more akin to getting a piercing or a tattoo.
Kind of.
But it's like a really, like
kind of.
It's more than a piercing or a tattoo, because it's a physical, a deep physical implant that changes a lot of things.
Okay, so then let's take this a step further.
So
if we're able to do gene therapy to change your fucking chromosome, if you're born with the XY chromosome, now we can change you to an XX chromosome, and the gender reassignment surgery. Is that eugenics then? Because that's coming. That's coming.
Like actual gene manipulation at like
to where your chromosome is actually changed. It's only a matter of time. It's only a matter of time if we keep going down the road that we're on.
So that'd be like a combination of like selecting
CRISPR.
Yeah.
That's what it would be.
Just gene selection.
It would be CRISPR, that thing that already exists.
We're only going to allow these expressions. We're going to inhibit certain expression types. Well, that's really dangerous. That's.
And this is what is crazy. We said it was deplorable and despicable when the Nazis did it, but now that the left wing is doing it in America, it's politically correct. And I think what ends up happening is we live in an age of doublespeak and things being redefined. We don't even know when the Democratic left wing has been subverted to a point where you step back and look at it, and now they're doing the shit that we fucking literally went to war for the Nazis doing on Jews. These things are being done voluntarily in America in a way that if you step back and look at them, these are the things that we went to war with the Nazis over for doing to the Jews. So we have to really say, what the fuck is going on with this ideology right now? Because again, I'm not saying this has nothing to do with taking away people's rights to gender reassignment surgery. I'm saying I don't believe a 13-year-old should know what it feels like. Like, if you're a boy, you shouldn't know what it feels like to be a man yet. You don't know what it fucking feels like to be a man yet. So if you're telling a 13-year-old boy they should know what it should feel like to be a man, and if they don't, that means you might be a girl. That's wrong. That's not right. And there's this weird narrative that's happening. I think that people are confusing personal freedoms with the lines of where personal freedoms are drawn in society have more to do with cultural expressions that they are having their attention focused on without their knowledge. So people are being socially engineered to talk about things. A great example is the Gillette ad that has been getting everyone's...
Oh yeah, I love the Gillette ad.
You know, if everyone all of a sudden starts talking about the same thing at the same time, no matter which side you're on, you've been socially engineered.
Oh,
everyone
it's incredible.
Who is talking about that, including myself right now, but this is for the sake of talking about social engineering, to say this is an example of social engineering. Now, the point is to have the discussion about the topic. They're not telling us what to think about the topic. Yeah. Many people will say they're telling us what to think, but in fact, the point was to spark the topic, because if you really look at what was put out, everything they put out, both sides. If you say a positive and a negative, someone who's geared to only hear the negative isn't going to hear the positive.
Yeah.
And someone who's geared to hear the positive isn't going to hear the negative. So you have these polarized statements that allow both audiences to engage and be correct, and because of the way they approach the media, they shut out what was present from the other side and only frame their argument as if the side that they're quoting exists without the other side. And this is like a common way that information is presented in American society.
So when I asked the gallery, like, hey, has anyone seen this? Was anybody offended, and why? The vast majority of the response were like, I love it. And one person was like, it's about toxic masculinity and institutionalized sexism and all these things, that he's like, oh yeah, these are not really desirable things. And there was one person who said that it was virtue signaling and just dumb. It's like, okay, but why? I understand that virtue doesn't require attendance or an audience. Like it doesn't need a spotlight. Virtue just exists because somebody is virtuous.
What's not virtue signaling though?
But exactly.
In 2019, everything you do is virtue signaling. You have to virtue signal in order.
Well, it's broadcasting your in the early 2000s. We were told to call it branding, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's all about branding and the way you market yourself and the forward presence that we exude, and of course it's about virtue signaling.
Yeah.
How can you want people to know that you are socially conscious and can participate in a meaningful dialogue and can help resolve things with ideas that are tenable.
And here's why. In 2019, when everyone has access to information, whether it's to consume or to produce information, everything is accessible now. There's no corner of the earth that is inaccessible. Even the Sentinel Island's accessible, but they just don't want to be part of it.
Yeah.
So the issue becomes the person who does not comment on what everyone else is commenting on is by not making a comment, you're still virtue signaling. That's the irony. This is like what Americans don't understand about duality. The opposite always defines whatever it's the opposite of.
Yeah.
And this is like a very hard pill for Americans to swallow. So if you're saying, oh, I'm not going to comment on this subject, by not commenting, you're sending a virtue. And whether you like it or not, that's what happens when something becomes an issue. And this is like, by something becoming an issue, you not commenting says that you don't care. That's what that signal is of your virtue about that said subject. And this is, everyone knows it, and they choose to employ when they play dumb about that rule, because it's like, for example, Game of Thrones. I'll use that as an example, just because people are very polarized about it. You're either
really
a fan of it, or you watched it once and you hate it, or you're one of those people who's proud that you've never seen an episode at all, which is a fucking virtue signal. So if you're like, I've never taken the time to see one episode of Game of Thrones, I'm too good for dragons and titties, sorry. That's a virtue signal. Like, no matter if you want to admit it or not, like, when you're trying to say that you've ignored Game of Thrones for over a fucking decade, and there's all these people who are like either way into it, or all these people who are like, this sucks for XXX and XYZ, and the person who chooses not to engage is still virtue signaling, whether they want to, like,
it's funny is I tried to read the first book, and it took me almost 9 months because I just couldn't get into it for whatever reason. I just wasn't trying to read it. I was trying to read it at the end of the night, and I was falling asleep, and so it took me longer than it should have. And in the end, I don't remember dragons or titties. I remember political drama and assassination attempts and a medieval culture and a complex religion, and it was an interesting
story. But you're
story.
talking about the book.
Yeah.
I don't give a fuck about the books. I read books. I read comics.
Yeah.
I don't give a fuck about the Fire and Ice books. I really don't.
So then I tried to watch the series when it was first coming out, but it was being doled out once a week. And it was obviously well produced, and I know the story is going to be pretty interesting, because HBO doesn't sign on to things that suck. They're really selective, so I know that it's going to be a good story. And then of course I know that the story deviates from the books at some point, because at some point the series started telling the story beyond the books. I don't know how that even worked, but whatever. That's cool.
Well, I mean, because it has its own, like, it was working with George Martin, so they could go wherever.
Yeah. And and all that stuff's cool. And eventually, I'm gonna marathon that entire series, and I'm just waiting I'm just waiting for it to all be done, and not just done, but like in the public consciousness, I want it to be done, so that when I experience it, there's not some active, really active, oh, blah blah blah, these things. And so somebody might be able to tell me something about it, but it'll be like vague memories. I've watched a few series like that where I don't know anything about it, and it's like old enough that nobody's watching anymore.
Yeah.
And they're actually, I can appreciate them in different ways, because I've been burned with bad television recommendations by it's not that I still trust people's recommendations, but sometimes you get something just like, what the was that? Like, what were they even thinking? And then of course the show only lasts like one season.
Yeah, and I think that's the recommendations, everything, because the whole reason I even started watching Game of Thrones, it was season 2, so already right there, I didn't watch the first one because I don't like to watch first seasons just in case they cancel it.
Yeah.
I'm just one of those people, just because
you gotta wait.
You have to wait.
If you get invested in some characters
and then they cancel it,
they pull some Firefly shit on you again, and you're like
fuck everybody.
And then
you
they
get
make
so
one movie.
Yeah.
Oh, those bastards.
But so it was already season 2 for Game of Thrones, and then one of my friends is like, she's like, this show is about dragons, magic, titties, and gratuitous sex. And I'm like,
wait,
what's wrong? Like, where can you go wrong? So then that's where I'm like, with the expectations that were set up, it wasn't like, oh, this is gonna be this fantastic tale about political drama, and you're gonna learn about the intricacies of this fake, because it's not real, but this fake land's dynamics of family and how feudalism was set in this time. Like, it's not the same as
the rules are completely different from what we
Downton Abbey. Like, Downton Abbey is like you know, a person, like a drama of...
That's like post-medieval.
Yeah. It's a Victorian character drama, where this is like, there's so many things, and the drama is just almost an afterthought in the way that it's presented. It's an epic on screen. It's all about the visual presentation. There's so much. That's why, to me, the book is a whole different thing, because you get to do all this stuff in your head when you're reading the book.
Sure.
But this is the pomp and the circumstance and all of the grandiose display that's put on is for an experience that you're supposed to get from just like sitting back and enjoying it as like a viewer, in a way that you don't get to be as passive when you're reading a book. So this is it's always been never about, oh, I'm gonna watch this and go read the books because the story's interesting. Like, no, this is its own experience. And it's like, I've never been interested in the books. Like, yeah. I have no interest in the books, but the story that is in the TV show, like, I'll fucking, like, if we had to wait 24 hours in the snow in a tent to watch the episode, or else you didn't get to watch it, I would do that, just because I'm so excited to see how it plays out, because I'm so emotionally invested in all the characters and the storyline and everything. And that's where it's like, at this point, you can only get... Here's another, like, not, I mean, obviously this whole podcast is about tangents, but how lucky were we to be alive when the Chappelle Show season 1 and 2 came out fresh? What do you remember what the world was like when you were like waiting for a new episode of Chappelle Show, and then the fucking Chappelle Show dude came on, and that shit was like, it was like a weekly event. Yeah. That you don't get that anymore. And there are certain things in time where the confluence of media and culture play out in certain ways where you're like, oh, there's only going to be one moon landing that everybody shares like that. There's only going to be one time that SpaceX fucking puts a Tesla into space that everybody saw, or there's one time that Felix Baumgartner...
Hey, that thing orbited the sun finally.
Nice.
Yeah. It's the first car to orbit the sun.
There's only going to be one time in history where the first car orbits the sun.
Yeah, I know.
There's these points. But I feel like the Chappelle Show is on the list with, like, the fucking moon landing, because it was so culturally impactful in a way where you're like, you wouldn't think a comedian would be as culturally impactful as a goddamn moon landing. But I would argue he is, in a way that, like I said, the feeling that you get from waiting for a Chappelle Show to come out is something that is... Like, I've never been in a spot where that's happened. And I don't think... It's not just Dave Chappelle. It's the confluence of the time. Like, everyone was still... Like, we were all still post-traumatized from 9/11.
Yeah.
But we were still naive enough, and there still wasn't access to all this information yet. This is, like, just a weird point in time where you could still joke about, like, gay... Or, like... and they were make gay jokes.
But he wasn't trying to piss people off like South Park.
Right. Yeah. It's South Park it wasn't season 20 yet. It was still like season 12 or whatever. Like, I don't know what season they were in. Remember. They'd still gone so long where they'd been on for too long. Like, I think I had stopped watching South Park by that point. I haven't watched South Park in so fucking long, man. Because after a certain point, it's like the same formula. Like, I couldn't, in the same way that when South Park first started, that was like its own cultural thing, and then it just wore itself out